So there's really three things. The first is this war powers resolution that's making its way through the Senate potentially as early as tonight. The House will most likely get it to Thursday. Long story short on this one is we think the resolutions will fail. Look, even if they were to succeed, President Trump would veto them. And there's just nowhere close to the votes to override President Trump's veto.
So the war powers resolution, that's to limit what President Trump can do?
Correct. That would actually require President Trump to have congressional authorization to continue the war in Iran. Now, this is something that, Congress doesn't matter who the president is, Republican or Democrat. Congresses usually don't like when presidents, unilaterally go forth and create conflicts.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah, exactly. And so, this is more of a symbolic exercise. This is to put people on the record because with 60% of the Americans against this conflict as of right now, according to the polling data, the thought here is that President Trump may not so much care about the polling data, but all 435 members of the House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate will as they get closer to the midterms. Now, the other things is we have a DHS shutdown that continues. There really hasn't been much way in that. We're still waiting for those TSA sick out numbers to start to increase. That's what resolved the shutdown back in 2018. But obviously things continue. The Senate is actually debating a bill that would ban corporate purchases of single family homes. So the Senate is still continuing to try to pass legislation while the war continues.
So I'm curious, are there expectations that Congress would declare war? I know that Congress hasn't declared war since 1942, only about 11 times in U.S. history. But I'm curious, I know we've been saying conflict, we've been saying war, but it's Congress that declares it. Right. Yeah,
and there's really no anticipation that this would happen. I mean, you have on the Democratic side, Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania has said that he supports President Trump's strategy on this. And then likewise, the Republican Rand Paul from Kentucky has said that he's against President Trump's strategy on this. You're not going to get anywhere close to a majority or to a veto-proof majority on this. And then on the House side, Speaker Johnson and the Republicans have largely supported President Trump on this. So, again, this is mostly just a political exercise. Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia held a similar vote when this happened for Venezuela. And it just goes back to the idea that Congress doesn't like it when presidents start conflicts. But there's really not much they can do to stop them either.
And that would be December 8th, 1941, when the last Congress declared war, World War II. So, Nathan, what's the game plan here for, keeping the government open? What's the next thing that Congress needs to do here? Because we do have the elections coming up towards the end of the year.
So there's not a lot left on the legislative calendar. But let's talk about this DHS shutdown, for example, because that's what's limiting a lot of, making people a little bit nervous to fly when they think they're going to have a 3-hour wait at the TSA lines. There really hasn't been much in the way of negotiations. You have seen some statements from some of the moderate members of both parties to say, look, maybe we should try and figure something out while the conflict with Iran is continuing. But, we haven't really seen any substantial negotiations over ICE tactics, if you will. Democrats still think that they have a playing hand. Republicans still think they have a playing hand, and so as a result, the shutdown continues. But there are other pieces of legislation. I just mentioned this housing bill before. This is a very bipartisan housing bill. It doesn't have a lot that excites us at the Bloomberg Intelligence. It's a lot of cutting regulatory red tape, but there is a provision in here that would ban corporations that have more than 350 single-family homes from purchasing new homes. That was one of President Trump's big wishes, and it passed an initial vote in the Senate last night, 84-6.
So, Nora, I was flying this weekend, I tried to make an extra effort to be extra courteous to the TSA people because I knew they were working and they weren't getting paid.
Yes.
And I'll tell you what, the lines were perfect. Everything was moving perfect,
so
both in Newark and SFO. So hats off to the TSA folks still getting the job done while they're not getting paid.
Yeah, how are we anticipating this as we're going back, Nathan, to talk to you? I wanted to know, what do you think about how this will develop? There's a lot of things going on in Washington. There's a lot of things at top of mind, but we do know that the geopolitics remain front and center right now. But what do you think in terms of the outlook for DHS and as we think about budget funding for the government more broadly?
So I think the DHS shutdown will get resolved sometime in the next few weeks. I don't think it's really going to be all that much of a market mover. And I think it's going to be a similar story to what happened in 2018. The TSA sick out actually increased to about 10%. That's when we started seeing long lines at the airports. And that's when the American populace said to Congress, get your job done. I think a similar story is going to play out here. So think about it in the next 1 to 2 weeks. But there is a window for when the legislative angle begins to close because, like I said, we have this election back in November. And, for every day that you spend here in Washington, somebody's campaigning against you back home. And so the folks in the House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate, they don't want to be here. Today is the first primary day. You know, the Texas and North Carolina start today. And so the election mindset is really going to quickly shape Congress's focus, if you will. And so we have probably, I'd say, about another month or two to get substantial legislation done. Everything else is probably going to get pushed until after the midterm elections. And to your question about the budget, I don't anticipate we'll see any type of budget agreement anytime soon, which suggests come September 30th, you're going to see another kick of the can until after the midterms.